Ashes and Ghosts by Matthew G McMillan. "My shoes," Lana said in frustration. Her head was thrust forward and her arms were outstretched at her sides. Her dark brown eyes were slightly squinted. "You know, the red ones that I wore to your brother's wedding last summer, with the great heels." Paul shrugged as his tall figure leaned against the doorframe between the hall and the bedroom. He refused to get her worked up any further. "Need help looking?" "They were here," Lana insisted, shaking her head. Her medium-length light brown hair dangled down the sides of her face. Her red lips stood out against her pale skin. "Right here in the closet." "I can help you look," Paul offered again. His arms remained crossed. He knew better than to start digging in the closet beside his wife without asking first. The first 2 years of marriage had been learning years. He would help her when she agreed to it. Lana turned back to face the closet, and Paul was about to go wait in the living room when she sighed and said, "Yeah, baby, I could use your help." Her response surprised him. Never before had she agreed so quickly. He walked up behind her and put an arm around her waist. "Where do I start looking?" he asked softly. Lana looked up at him, smiled, and pointed half-heartedly to the right side of the bedroom closet. "Check the boxes on that side," she said, her voice a little shaky, as it always was when she was frustrated and upset. "They have to be in a box or something," she said, this time a little firmer and with more control. Paul gave her waist a brief squeeze and bent down, leaning into the large closet. Lana had a few pairs of shoes on the closet floor, but none of them were red. There were 6 boxes, a couple the size of shoe boxes, but he doubted the high heels were in there. He moved a couple other boxes and pulled out the largest one. Lana had already started digging on the left side of the closet. Paul opened up the large box by pulling back the 4 top flaps. It was a jumbled mess of goods inside, old Discmans still with headphones, cords bound with twisty ties, a stuffed penguin, Lana's favorite animal, that had won for her at the county fair a couple years ago, some old VHS cassettes without the cardboard cases, some gloves, and at the bottom, as he dug, a small box about the size of a shoebox. He got a good hold of it and began to pull on it, moving some of the box contents above it in an attempt to pull it free. Just as he pulled it out, Lana made that sound she made when she was relieved and happy. It was both a sigh and a yip. Paul had always thought it a very sexy sound. "Here they are," she said, holding them up. They did have sleek heels, and just enough of a shine to make them look classy. Paul loved seeing his wife in heels. It was worth the effort. He was about to replace the small box in the large box and put it back in the closet when he glanced down at the small box in his hand. It was not a shoebox. It was solid, as if made from a heavy-duty plastic. It was black with a double-lined gold trim running around the edge of the box top. It was odd. 2 old rubber bands were holding the lid on tight. "What's that?" Lana asked, leaning closer to him. They had just taken a shower, but she hadn't put on perfume yet, and she smelled terrific. "Box. Kinda cool," he said, turning it a little. He expected to see writing on it, but couldn't find any. "What's in it?" she asked. "I've never seen it before." Paul pulled off the rubber bands. They were dry and wrinkled. The second one snapped. He lifted the lid off the black box to see what was inside. It was a wooden box that fit snugly inside the black one. A small torn piece of lined yellow paper was taped to the top. Paul flipped it up. The handwritten words, "Mom's Ashes," were scrawled in black marker. Paul looked at Lana. They exchanged an odd look, and both smiled an "I don't know either" smile. "I don't think my folks put it in here. My grandparents are still around, unless it's my great-grandparents," Paul reasoned. Lana lost interest. "I'm going to finish getting ready. Those reservations are in 15 minutes. I don't want to keep my sister waiting." Paul nodded and looked at the box for a moment as Lana went into the bathroom. Could it be from her side of the family? It was packed with her stuff. Well, mostly her stuff. A couple of things had been on top, but they could have been just tossed on top. Lana didn't take long. He set the box aside, hoping to check it out more when they got back. It was 11 p.m. when they finally arrived back home. Lana and Paul had forgotten about the wooden box with the note. Paul was a little tipsy, Lana a little more so. They kissed when they got inside the house. They made love on the couch. They went to bed, not thinking about the box. The night was still. The only sounds in the house were the ticking of the clock in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator, and the long, slow breathing of two people in deep sleep. The neighborhood was a small one, few pets, no barking dogs, no yelling kids, no large rigs barreling down a main road, nor was there an airport nearby. It was quite silent on Bleeley Circle that night, but there was one thing stirring in the night. At 3:12 a.m., a whispered question came from the closet with the box labeled Mom's Ashes, which neither Paul or Lana heard. At 2 minutes to 4 a.m., there was a sigh from the closet. Nothing else stirred until the alarm sounded at 6:30 a.m. "Too damn early," Paul said, rummaging through the shirts hanging in the closet. His 6-foot frame was slightly hunched as he leaned forward to examine the clothes in the dimly lit room. Lana was turned away from him, still under the warm covers in bed. "Don't turn the light on yet," she said groggily. "Not ready." I know," Paul said. He grabbed a white buttoned shirt and yanked it off the hanger. He had pulled too hard and the hanger bounced up off the bar, making a glorious ruckus as it hit the back wall and a few boxes on its way to the closet floor. "Damn it," he said, at the same time she said, "What the hell are you doing?" "I was getting a shirt," Paul said defensively. "Pulled too..." He looked down at where the hanger had fallen. It was lying against the side of the large box he had gone through last night. The odd, gold-trimmed box was resting on top. He could just make it out in the poor light. He bent down and picked it up with his right hand. "Pulled to what?" Lana asked, rolling over. She saw the box in his hands. "What's that?" "The box of ashes," Paul replied. He'd been awake for half an hour, but hadn't gotten in the shower yet, and he was never fully awake unless he'd showered. "The one I found last night." "Oh yeah," his wife said, remembering. "Does it actually have ashes in it?" Paul grinned in the dark. "Turn on the light and we'll see." "Nice try, smart-ass," Lana said, smiling. "No, really," her husband urged earnestly. Lana rolled her eyes and let out a forced, exasperated sigh. "So I guess that means I'll turn on the light," Paul said with a smile. His wife replied by pulling his pillow over her head. Paul got up and took the box out into the kitchen, not wanting to push her. He shook the box a little, but it didn't make any sound. He set it on the counter and pulled off the top. He pulled out the wooden box and set it down beside the black one it had been stored in. He tried to pull the top off, but it was either stuck or sealed. It wouldn't budge. Feeling determined to see what it really was, he opened up the top drawer beside him and picked out a butter knife. He carefully placed the blade between the solid flat base and what he assumed was the lid, since the only crease he saw was at the base. He twisted the knife in his hand and he heard a small crack. He moved the knife to the other side of the box, twisted again. This time, the lid popped off with a crisp splintering sound and fell on the floor with a rather loud clatter. "Damn it!" Paul glanced back in the direction of the bedroom, but couldn't hear if Lana was reacting to the clatter he was making. But now the box was open and he could see inside. There was a small silver container, very much like a standard cereal bowl, attached to the base. The silver container had a lid with a small lip edge and a little latch. A thought flashed across his sleepy consciousness. Don't mess with the dead. But it passed, and his curiosity stepped up to take charge. He popped open the lid, and sure enough, inside could easily be ashes. Gray powder. Is this how cremations are done? Paul thought. He glanced at the clock. Work was looming closer. He picked up the wooden box top and set it beside the base in the silver container. It would have to wait until he got home from work. Lana rolled out of bed and stretched. She had a short day at work today, and it felt good to stay in bed that extra hour. Paul was finishing up in the bathroom. She could hear him brushing his teeth and tapping his thumb on the bathroom counter. It used to drive her a little nuts, but it meant that he was happy and in deep thought. He had a song stuck in his head. She wondered what it was. Lana smiled. She gave a half-hearted attempt at making the bed, which was putting the covers up to where the pillows were and flattening out 2 large wrinkles in the blanket. It was good enough. She went into the kitchen, grabbed a mug from the cupboard, and poured herself some fresh coffee. Paul was like clockwork with making morning coffee. This was a good thing. She glanced down at the counter. The silver container attached to the wooden base was there, the one that Paul had found in the closet, the one that was supposed to have ashes in it. Lana tried to remember if any family member had given the box to her. Nothing came. It was an odd thing to find in one's closet, for sure. Her family had always talked about the plots up at Hillcrest Cemetery. 3 generations were up there, maybe more. If her family had mentioned cremations, she couldn't recall. The light above her flickered. She glanced up. The light flickered again. Her concentration was broken as Paul came out of the bathroom and she took her coffee into the bedroom. She liked to talk to him while he got dressed on her short days. It put her at ease, made her feel connected. They talked a little, made plans for supper. The kitchen light flickered. Paul left for work. Lana showered. The kitchen light flickered. Lana left for work, turning the kitchen light off as she left. Paul had spent some of his free time thinking about the silver container of ashes at work, more so on his drive home. When he arrived home, he went directly to the counter, took a picture with his phone, and sent it to his mother, who knew quite a bit about their family history. "Ever seen this before?" he asked in a text. He went into the bedroom and changed, next to use the bathroom. The radio in the bedroom came on. Paul stopped in the middle of brushing his teeth. He stuck his head out of the bathroom doorway, his tall, lean figure leaning against the doorframe, toothbrush in his mouth. He cocked his head. He could hear music coming from the bedroom. He went in and shut it off, a little confused. His phone buzzed. Paul pulled it out and checked his text. "Doesn't look familiar," his mother had sent. There was a crash from the living room. Paul started. Something inside him was starting to grow. It was small and tight. It was focused and tense. It heightened his senses and put him on edge. Fear. He went into the living room to see what had made the sound. He expected something to be on the floor, or maybe find one of Lana's paintings behind the couch or a chair. Everything was where it should be, where it had been when he had come home from work not that long ago. Still, he was sure that he had heard something make a loud sound from the living room. "Anyone here?" he asked the air, not expecting an answer, but fearfully wondering if he would get a disembodied reply. But there was no reply, not one that he could hear, anyway. He jumped when his phone rang. He looked at the face of the phone. Lana. She preferred calling to texting. "Hey, babe," Paul answered. "You almost ready?" she asked, missing his slightly tense tone. Paul nodded, unaware that he did so. Yeah, almost ready." "Okay, baby," Lana said, sounding almost chipper. "See you in a few minutes. Love you." "Love you too, babe," he replied, still looking around the living room. He finished getting ready, listening carefully in case he heard another strange sound, but nothing odd happened. The house was quiet and still. He turned off all the lights but the one outside the front door and left. The light over the front door was out when Paul pulled into the driveway. Lana was following his car in her SUV, and their headlights flashed across the front of the house. There, standing beside the rose bush to the left of the door, under the living room window, was a dark figure, almost like a shadow. For a couple of seconds, he didn't react to seeing the figure. He was tired, ready to collapse on the couch, and not fully aware of his surroundings. But the image came back to him, sharper than he had just seen a brief moment ago. A figure, black as pitch, hunched under the living room window. The stark contrast of the green around the figure was intense. The figure had flinched slightly as the headlight beams flashed across that part of the house. Nothing in his mind came up with the word person, thief, prowler, or the like. Only that what had just been in the shrubs beside the house looked to have had a human shape, but was more like a walking shadow. As he put his foot on the brake, he realized that Lana had already stopped. As he turned to glance at her SUV, her driver's side door flung open and she jumped out of the vehicle. She peered at him while pointing at the shrubs where he had just seen the shadow figure. Lana was fast, and by the time he got out of his car, she was already in the shrubs, yanking them aside and calling out sharp questions mingled with threats. "Hey, hey," he said, coming up to her, "take it easy." "Did you see her?" she asked him, her beautiful angled face lit by the headlights off to the side. It was a face full of adrenaline and determination. "I saw something," Paul replied, "but it didn't look like a woman." "It was a woman," Lana stated, clearly not asking for his opinion, "and I want to know what she was doing peering into her goddamn house." Before Paul could say anything, it would have taken him a few seconds to choose his next words carefully anyway, she turned back to the shrubs and flipped on the light from her cell phone. It was bright. She was wearing a dress, Lana stated. Something must have been caught on these branches, some piece of clothing. She paused and looked at Paul over her shoulder. Should we call the police? You saw her too, right? I said I saw something, he answered, holding his hands out at his sides, but it was more like a shadow. I didn't see a dress. It was blue, Lana said, turning back to the shrubs. She was a little out of breath. White trim, close fit, showed most of her arms. There was a crash from inside the house, and the couple stopped, holding their breaths. Lana turned. Her eyes were even wider and more intense now. She flashed Paul a look of concern, fright, and determination. He knew that she was going to run up to the front door before she took her first step. When she did, he was right behind her. Lana darted over to her vehicle and grabbed her keys, turning off her headlights. She ran up to the front door, unlocked it, and flung the door open. She burst inside without fear or any caution, Paul noted. Still, he went in behind her. I saw you in the shrubs outside, Lana shouted, flipping on lights as she went from room to room, Paul at her heels. The whole time they searched, he kept thinking about the sound he had heard earlier that day of something crashing in the living room. The sound that he had found no source of. Yet, each light revealed nothing changed in the whole house. A little of Lana's intensity had dwindled after a thorough search 15 minutes later. Paul parked his car, made a quick look around the house outside, and came in to tell her about the spilled ashes, the radio coming on by itself, and the sound he had found no source of. Lana was pacing the living room. Paul was leaning against the couch. So, ghosts? She asked, looking at him with a hard but not unkind face. Paul snorted. Sounds weird when you say it out loud, huh? Lana rolled her eyes. Do you think we should call the police? And tell them what? He asked. Lana pursed her lips. Just in case there is a prowler, I'd like to have it on record. 20 minutes later, Lana gave an officer a description of the woman. When the officer left, she didn't feel as secure as she'd hoped. It took them a little while to calm down. Some popcorn and a little TV, which neither of them fully watched as they were thinking about the possibility of a ghost or a prowler around the house. They talked about what little they knew about break-ins and ghosts. Paul was a little surprised at how much Lana knew about the spirit world. They were lying on their backs, looking up through the dark at the ceiling. Lana reached for Paul's hand under the covers, and they intertwined fingers. I was living at the old farmhouse in Clayton County, in Barton, she said softly, her words distant as they came from lips Paul could not see. I was 4 or 5. My dad had the old Ford pickup, and when he came home from work it could be pretty late. Sometimes it was midnight by the time he got home. I could hear him driving down the lane. Paul could tell that a smile had crept across her lips. He could hear it clearly in her voice as she spoke, remembering more and more as she opened herself up to the past. Trucks have that heavier, fuller sound, you know? And his had something loose somewhere. He could never find it, but it rattled when he went fast or over bumpy roads. And that long driveway at the farmhouse was pretty bumpy. She put her free hand behind her head, and Paul didn't need to see her to know how she looked. Her face would have had a sad smile, and her eyes distant, as if drifting out of time. He just smiled and was glad to be beside her as she shared her memories. One night, she continued, must have been a weekend because I was still up reading and Jim was out with his friends. I heard his truck coming down the road. I went to my window on the second floor and watched to see him pull in the long driveway. She paused and her hand tensed a little. The smile wasn't in her voice as much when she continued. There was a man in the front yard. I could see him, clearly, even though it was night. Lana's voice was deeper and stronger. He was wearing baggy clothes, dirty as hell. Looked like a farmer. He had a brimmed hat and his sleeves were rolled up. He was looking out at my dad's truck as it was pulling up to the house. I thought Dad would get out of his truck and start demanding to know why this dirty guy was standing in the yard. I turned my head just a little bit to see my dad getting out of his truck. When I turned back, the guy was gone. The room was quiet for a moment. Paul had heard the story from her years ago, back when they had been dating, but it felt more real now. That human shadow he'd seen under the window was still fresh in his mind. Ghosts, he said softly. Crazy. Lana breathed out through her nose in a long, thoughtful exhale. Now that I think about it, maybe my dad only saw the black shadow like you did, she said. In the dark, it seems reasonable that he wouldn't have seen anything. She rolled over to face him in the darkened room. Ever since you found the ashes in the closet. Weird stuff. Are you afraid? Paul asked. Nope, Lana replied. We see 'em, they vanish. What's to be afraid of? Paul smiled and reached out to touch her arm. Her skin was smooth. It was soft and warm. We'll figure it out, he said. She snuggled up to him and rested her head along his neck, between his chin and shoulder. Yeah. There was a soft whisper as the closet door opened a few inches. A dark, shadowy shape slipped out, gaining human form as it rose up beside the bed. The digital alarm clock radio flickered. 1:15 a.m. Went out and then came on at its usual steady glow. The shadow figure standing beside the bed was that of a woman. Her fingers slowly worked like seaweed in a steady current. Her chin was thrust out as she gazed down at the sleeping lovers. Her fingers drew in and her hands clenched into fists. She whispered for more than a minute, and then turned and flowed out of the room into the house. There was a loud crash from the bathroom that woke both Paul and Lana at the same time. Their eyes were wide open. The small nightlight in the bathroom wasn't bright, but it showed a dark figure standing between the bathroom and the bedroom. For a few tense seconds, the three just looked at each other. Paul was terrified but couldn't move. What do you want? Lana managed to say. The words came out groggily and were heavy with fear, but they did come out. The black shape of the woman in the hallway waved a hand in front of herself as if letting go of an invisible bird as it took flight. Set me free, came a whispered reply. The voice was frail and sounded as if spoken from a kindly grandmother. Free? Lana whispered back. Again, the shadow woman's arm flowed elegantly up in a slow flourish. Let ashes to wind, came the reply in the same frail, kindly voice. And then the shadow started wavering and dissipating like ink dropped into moving water. In a matter of a few seconds, she was gone. Lana turned her bedside light on with a loud click, and Paul yelped a little. Get the boxes of ashes, Lana said firmly, giving him a look almost as frightened as his. She forced down her fear, determined to take charge. I think I've had enough of this. Let's get that woman's ashes out of our damn house. Paul got up out of bed, eyes wide, and fetched the box with the note that read, Mom's Ashes. Lana had her robe on and was at the front door. She was trembling, but held the door open as Paul approached. He held the box as though it were a large, dead insect away from his body. The couple rushed outside, and Paul looked at his wife for guidance. Just dump the fucking thing, she said, sounding as frantic as she was. Paul opened the box and flung it into the small wooded area that led to the neighbor's yard. As the ashes spread out in a dusty plume in the night, there was a hint of a woman's sigh. Did we set her free? Paul asked, his face a mix of terror and hope. Lana looked at him, shrugged, and said, I hope so.